We are in this month talking about water stories in the Bible. And so I thought it was a good idea for us to get a sense of where the water is in the stories of the Bible. It's time for maps and a geography lesson. This is a basic map of areas that you hear about in the Bible. It's got a lot of water, and I'm going to point some of the key places out. First, there's the Mediterranean Sea, and when I think about the Mediterranean Sea, I think of this deep blue. And the whole coastline there along Israel is the Mediterranean Sea. So this is what they might see when they looked out their window. Another important body of water is the Red Sea, and this is a picture of it from space. The Red Sea has been around for a long time, and when you hear the story of Moses leading the people to freedom across the Red Sea, this is what they're talking about. The space right there, it's not easy to see on this map, is the Jordan River. This is where Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist. And I guess I always pictured it as being really arid and dry, but it's got all this life around it because where there's water, there's green life. That tiny little dot there is the Sea of Galilee, where Jesus spent most of his life and ministry. This is where he would have called the fishermen to be his followers. This is where he would have calmed the sea in the storm. There's a couple other places of water on the map. Over here is what is sometimes called the Fertile Crescent. It's the land in between two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. You might have remembered having to learn where that is on a map growing up. And again, where there's water, there's the ability to grow and plant and develop cities. During the Bible, this area was controlled by three different empires. First, it was controlled by the Assyrians, who took over Israel. Then it was controlled by the Babylonians, who took over Israel. And then it was controlled by the Persians, who took over the area again. And each one of these empires, as they lived there, wanted to maintain control forever, because it was a really great place to be in charge. The other big water area is the Nile Basin in Egypt. And these two areas like to trade with one another. The problem is, in the middle of them was a gigantic desert. And so in order to trade between the two greatest empires of any given time, they needed to find a way to do it. Their route took them right through Israel. This is the most famous trade route in ancient times. And most of the Bible story is set right in the heart of that trade route. I want to give you, for reference, a couple of other maps. The one on the left is the Middle East today, kind of where some of the country's political borders are. And then there's the map we've been looking at, so you can use it for reference. And then the lower map is the Palestinian land in Israel. And this is an area where there's a lot of tension, a lot of news, and everyone wants to control this tiny little strip of land. But today we're going to think about kind of that red line right there, and the area where the people of Israel made their home. It's surrounded by water. There's water everywhere. And so this water shaped a lot of their stories about who they were as a people. One of their core stories was that God made this land, and that God made it good, and that God will remake this land. Sometimes we talk about that in terms of a story of a new Eden. And all in the various places in the Bible, this message that God made the land, God made their land, is important. And so these are people who live in a place where they know the beauty of that blue Mediterranean water. They know the joy of that little green fuzz on the first day of the new harvest coming up, the new seedlings popping out of the earth. They know the sparkle of fish when they pull that nice one into their boat. They know beauty. And so a good number of the Psalms celebrate this particular aspect, this creation and this beauty. And we're going to share one today. This is number 140. And I'd like you to read it with me if you would. Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord from heaven. Praise God on the heights. Praise God, all of you who are his messengers. Praise God, all of you who comprise his heavenly forces. Sun and moon, praise God. All of you bright stars, praise God. You highest heavens, praise God. Do the same, you waters that are above the sky. Let all of these praise the Lord's name, because God gave the command, and they were created. God set them in place, always and forever. God made a law that would not be broken. Praise the Lord from the earth, you sea monsters and all you ocean depths. Do the same, fire and hail, snow and smoke, stormy wind that does what God says. Do the same, you mountains, every single hill, fruit trees and every single tree. Do the same, you animals, wild or tame, you creatures that creep along, and you birds that fly. Do the same, you kings of the earth, and every single person, you princes and every single ruler on the earth. Do the same, you young men, young women too, you who are old together with you who are young. Let all of these praise the Lord's name, because only God's name is high over all. Only God's majesty is over heaven and earth. God raised the strength of his people, the praise of all his faithful ones. That's the Israelites, the people who are close to him. Praise the Lord. That was the longest psalm we'll be reading today. We're going to read two more because this is helping us understand how the people talked about water. So the next one that we're going to look at is one of the psalms that talks about the stories of the great leaders. Because they remembered their good kings. They remembered their bad kings. But it happened that one of their great kings wrote a whole bunch of psalms. And that great king was named David. And David was chosen by God, anointed with oil when he was a young boy, only a shepherd, the youngest of his family, thought he'd amount to nothing, and he became one of the greatest kings of Israel. But David was also very, very human. David was told he would be king when there was still another king alive, so he was waiting for the King Saul to die. And it happened that David's best friend was named Jonathan, who was Saul's son. And somehow in the course of his life, he managed to be best friends with someone who probably thought maybe he should be king, being the son of the king and all. And the current king wasn't very happy that David existed because, Saul thought he could live forever. And yet David in his humanness managed to care for all of these relationships. David is known as the greatest king of Israel because he united the people. He made them understand that they were one people, not just all these tribes spread out here and there. And he was devoutly faithful. He trusted God. He sought God's advice. He sought God's wisdom. He was also human. One of the stories that David is most famous for is the story of Bathsheba, a woman he saw bathing on the roof, and he wanted her. So he arranged for her husband to be killed, and then he had her. David's life is a story of faith mixed with humanity. And so in many of the Psalms that he wrote, you can see that faith and humanity coming through. One that is probably everyone's favorite is an oldie but a goodie, Psalm 23. Listen to it this time for the water. Listen to it this time for a shepherd. Listen to it this time for someone who was anointed as king, faithful and human. Let's share in Psalm 23, and I put the King James Version up. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. So the great stories involved creation and beauty and a new Eden. And the great stories involved leaders. And the great stories also involved stories of places. One of their big stories was when the people were slaves in Egypt. And while they were slaves in Egypt, they wanted to go back to the land that they said was theirs, their land. And so the story of Moses and the Exodus and crossing the Red Sea, and the story of the plagues, and the story of wandering in the wilderness and finding water in a rock, all of that was one of their big stories, the story of the Exodus. And then they made their way to their land, and they grew as a country and as a people, and they had their great leaders until the people of Babylon captured them and claimed their nation for their own. The people of Babylon took some of the elite people back, the artists, the scholars, and brought them to the city of Babylon in the heart of that fertile area. Some people remained in the land of Israel, in a country that had been war-torn and tattered. But the people who were in Babylon were fairly upset. They had had a nation. They had had a place. They had had gardens and homes, and they were taken away to Babylon. And so in that place of sadness and anger and vengeance, they wrote this psalm. Psalm 137. Alongside Babylon's streams, there we sat down, crying because we remembered Zion. We hung our lyres up in the trees there, because that's where our captors asked us to sing. Our tormentors requested songs of joy. Sing us a song about Zion, they said. But how could we possibly sing the Lord's song on foreign soil? Jerusalem, if I forget you, let my strong hand wither. Let my tongue stick to the roof of my mouth. If I don't remember you, if I don't make Jerusalem my greatest joy. Lord, remember what the Edomites did on Jerusalem's dark day. Rip it down, all the way to its foundations, they yelled. Daughter Babylon, you destroyer, a blessing on the one who pays you back the very deed you did to us. A blessing on the one who seizes your children and snatches them on a rock. Ouch. Anger. Today we've walked through some of the geography of the land in the Bible, noting where the water is and how it shaped who they were as a people. There's one big water story that we left out. Any guesses? The flood. And we're going to talk about that story next week, all in its own. But when we read through the Psalms, we notice a couple of things. We notice that they bring their stories to God. They pour out their hearts to God. The good stuff, the bad stuff, the desires of what they want, the ways they hope they can believe in Psalm 23. Everybody wanted to be able to have the faith of King David. And not only did they bring their stories to God, but they wrote them down, which means that future generations would be able to learn from and grow from and understand, I'm not alone, as they read these words. The same gift that we find when we read them. If we're angry, we can find anger in here. If we're confused, we can find that in here. If we're joyful, if we're celebrating, we can find that in the Psalms. Well, what if we did this? What if we wrote down our stories of where we've been in our lives? Hard times, good times, confusing times, times where we've experienced healing. What if we wrote it down? What if we wrote down our water stories? You can see them all over town. There's some at the Commonweal, there's some up in the baptism display, there have been some in the plays, there are some at the museum. They're everywhere, and everywhere you see the stories is also the invitation to share your water story. What if we wrote our stories down, took our experience and put it into words, and then created our own songs from that? I'm going to give you a sheet of paper, and it's going to invite you to basically fill in the blanks. A significant moment in my life was when. A couple words. Optional. This time helped me learn. Sometimes we have times in our lives that we have no sense of meaning, no sense of direction from. We have not learned anything. Our only wish is that they did not happen. That's okay too. You don't have to fill in that blank. My opinion of God at that time was, the feelings I felt at that time were. What I wanted God to do was. Think back about that last song that you just heard about Babylon. A significant moment in my life was when we were taken away from our home and set on the shores of some foreign place, and they tried to make us sing. This time helped me learn. Life is hard. My opinion of God was abandonment. The feelings I felt at that time were anger and vengeance. And what I wanted God to do was bring me home and help me remember home. Help me remember Jerusalem. And oh, by the way, make my enemies suffer. So this is your homework this week. You don't have to bring it back here, but I would like you to try it. Write out one of your stories. And then at the very bottom of the sheet is a little fill in the blank to turn it into a song. I'm going to pass these out.